What's up again, everybody? Today we're going to make like a tier list thing. Look, we got it on the screen and we got all the cards and we got Abbas. What's up, Abbas? How's it going?
I'm great, Steven. Thank you for having me on. I'm happy to do this with you.
Abbas writes articles for Channel Fireball. If you haven't read them, you've written like a lot of articles too. Like you've been writing for what, like almost a year now? Or
Yeah, just underneath that. Yeah, I've been writing a lot on strategy and just more in depth, trying to break down some of the smaller pieces of the games, and then also doing some fun pieces here or there because why not? Tier list and rankings are always a good time.
And in fact, you reached out and you were like, hey, we should sit down and do a video of ranking all of the weapons on a tier list. And I said, why did I not think of that? At least that's what I said to myself after I saw your message. I was like, why did I not think of that? That's a perfect idea. I think this is going to be a ton of fun. And I think that I may talk a lot about these because this is an incredibly like robust topic. Because really it like, oh my gosh, these weapons, these are all the weapons, I believe. If we missed one, whoops. But who cares? These are all the weapons, and they're so flexible in so many different ways. So here's how we've got them classified. And tell me if I'm incorrect, but this is kind of how I think about this, Abbas. The S tier, in my opinion, is like the must-run, like the highlight of the class type weapon. It's the weapon that you play almost exclusively because it does exactly what you want it to do for the class. There's not a ton of these, in my opinion. But that's how I view the S tier. Would you agree?
Yeah. I think those weapons that are super polarizing, that you think of a class and you immediately think of those weapons, that's definitely what's going into S tier. And weapons generally that the opponent is forced to play around much more than, okay, this weapon really helps my game plan, it's fantastic. But some of those weapons sometimes just disrupt the opponent completely. And that definitely pushes those up to that S tier over A.
And then for me, A tier is like the step down. It's like probably the weapon you run every time, but it's not necessarily the, I guess, like clear-cut favorite. It is extremely powerful still. It's really a really great weapon to have, and you're probably almost always going to play it, except sometimes maybe there's a better option in your class or in general. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how I feel about it. The A tier myself.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Super reliable weapons and something you can depend upon. With almost every hand, it's going to be solid. But with those few hands, sometimes you're like, okay, I wish I had my other weapon in sideboard right now. Yeah. But otherwise, A tier is still awesome weapons, really strong.
And then B tier for me is the weapon that is generally solid. You put it into your main deck, and you're probably going to run it more than half the time as your main deck. You may side it out for specific matchups for a different weapon that serves a similar purpose, but generally pretty good to play. You'd obviously probably end up with this in Draft or in Sealed. I didn't even mention those formats, but this seems like the baseline B tier.
Yep. I think that's pretty fair. Middle of the tier impact. Sometimes a little clunky, and sometimes usually gets the job done for what you're trying to do, and usually sometimes gives you, I'd say even B tier, sometimes you can include like almost like a build around kind of weapon.
That's a good point.
Similar to maybe like where it might come in against certain heroes, or it might come in certain decks where it becomes super efficient, but only in this certain play style.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in fact, that's going to be interesting for one of the weapons. I'm already thinking about it. C tier.
Yeah.
C tier is like the step down from there. It's like you probably put this in your sideboard and maybe you sub it in, but more often than not, you're like, it's a fine weapon. I could play it in this matchup, but I'm normally not going to pick this up. It's kind of like, for me, this is like that very amorphous tier. I feel like there's going to be a lot of cards that fill up C tier because they're not quite good enough to hit here, but they're not complete failures. In my opinion, I feel like we're probably going to end up with a lot of weapons here, and maybe some here as well.
Yeah. That B and C is definitely going to be thoughtful, but C tier is interesting because a lot of the C tier weapons, at least from what I have in mind for a few of them, there's definitely those builds that certain decks or certain people just kind of put their mind towards, like, okay, I'm going to make this work, and it can be surprisingly good if you're not ready, if you don't know how the weapon functions well and what it wants to do. You can easily get caught off guard with those C tier weapons sometimes.
That's a good point too. Yeah. And then D tier are the weapons that you look at and you're like, that weapon would make a great coaster for my cup. And you just set your cup on that weapon off to the side, and then you look at it and you're like, you served your purpose, D tier weapon. That's that's mean. I shouldn't say that, because someone designed that card. D tier, like, you play it for the lulz, you play it for the memes, man. That's D tier weapons right there.
Yeah, if you're in D tier one day, you're crossing your fingers if you're a fan of those weapons, and like hoping those something comes out that pushes those D tier weapons up.
So, with all of that being said, we get to start, and we're going to go alphabetically. We get to start with Aether Conduit. What do you think about Aether Conduit, and where would you put it?
That Aether Conduit, the star of the show.
It's going right there, right to the top.
Right up. 2 arcane damage for 1 action?
Yeah, man.
Oh my goodness.
It's pretty spicy, okay? Look, this is a spicy weapon. Are you big on Aether Conduit? Because I would just sadly move this right down there. This is exactly where I put it.
Yeah, I've seen some Kanos run it Ultimate Pit Fight, but like rarely it's the better option. So it's definitely down D tier.
It's super spicy. I will say this, it's super spicy. If it said once per turn action, pay 2, deal 2 arcane damage, go again, then we'd be talking. But it doesn't say go again. And I guess that's okay in Wizard, but it just, I mean, it's seen no play. It's seen no play. And it kind of makes me sad because I have it in cold foil and it's really pretty. And I like that card. But to me, it is a D tier weapon. Maybe in the future, it will be better. Who knows?
Maybe very soon, hopefully.
Oh man, I really hope that we have Wizard in Tales of Aria. I'm not gonna lie, I really do. But I guess that's a video for another time.
Yeah. I would love to see Aether Conduit jump to a very, very strong weapon.
Oh my
the way,
gosh.
the way Chain changed like Nebula Blade and stuff. I would love to see a new weapon. A new wizard completely change up Aether Conduit.
That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? That'd be pretty sweet. All right, next up we have Anothos. Anothos, the Guardian weapon. I'm very comfortable. Just slamming this in S tier. This is his weapon. This is Guardian's weapon for the time being. Until we get Tales of Aria, and I am so certain that we're getting Guardian. There's no spoilers out for anything except the 3 that were spoiled before the spoiler season start, but it has to be a Guardian. It just makes so much sense. So maybe this changes. Maybe we get a cool new Guardian weapon. If Guardian is one of those, but for me, this is just S tier, front and center. What do you think?
Yeah, it's completely up there. The biggest thing is it's not even reliant entirely on Bravo. The synergy really is between like tectonic plating and Anothos, between the seismic surge. So even if there's a new Guardian, that's still there. Two cards for 6 is very, very good rate for your weapon, especially with what Guardians try to do to set up the bottom of that deck. So it's definitely a staple. Great late game, great early and great mid game. Not much hate.
You can't say much about it that's bad, right? I mean, it does exactly what you want it to do in Guardian, as we know Guardian in its current iteration, and that's exactly what you want. So to me, this is S tier. Okay, moving on. What do you think about Crucible of Aetherweave? What do you think about Crucible of Aetherweave?
Crucible's really, really interesting. It's one of the few weapons currently that plays at instant, at least for now. And it synergizes exactly with what Kano's trying to do. So if you're looking at purely from his standpoint, I'd probably say it would fit in as high A or maybe even low S with Crucible. I'm not exactly sure how it would fit in with a future wizard. Depending, because I feel like Kano is probably their iteration on, okay, this is probably, we're trying to go as fast as possible. I highly doubt another wizard is going to be faster than Kano from a design standpoint, the way they make him. His card is Blazing Aether, right? So Uh, but Crucible is very, very strong. Pumps all those 3s to 4s, and I don't know. What do you think, Steven? I think
Yeah,
in the
this
low
really,
S. Or,
I totally agree. This teeters for me between A and S. I say it teeters between A and S, and I think part of it is because I'm letting just the general wizard class performance affect my judgment as far as the weapon is concerned. And maybe you can sit here and consider the fact that sometimes you don't use Crucible of Aetherweave, but it's so powerful when you do on those huge turns just to pump something over your opponent's ability to actually block it with Null Rune that it just makes sense. I mean, in our current situation, it is the weapon you run. Period. End of story, right? And so
yes.
for me, just like an Othos, this is the weapon that you play in Wizard, and it's an S tier, right? That, I mean, it just kind of makes sense.
The better wizard player you are, I think you really start to appreciate that Crucible more and more. And using that Crucible pump at the right time during those turns is really pivotal to making like really pushing yourself as a wizard player as well. So definitely, I'd say it belongs in that S tier.
You know what? I just realized something. We don't have one of my favorite weapons on here. Centauri Saber is not on here. Centauri Saber. Where would you put... You know what? Here's the beauty of recording a video. I'll put it in post. Hey, everybody. This is in post. Look, there's a Centauri Saber. Okay, where would you put Centauri Saber? For me... Okay, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what I think. For me, Centauri Saber is like the quintessential A card. It explains A. It's like that card that you probably just run. It's probably just the weapon. But you could sub it out if you wanted to build around Raiden and do a Charge Bolton. It's exactly what you run if you're playing Kasai. It's a great weapon to play if you're playing Dorinthia as a secondary weapon to her Dawnblade if you wanted to, because you want to get more value out of Courage of Bladehold. It's like A tier for all of the different warrior options, in my opinion. So for me, I would just slap it in A tier because it just makes so much sense, and it's such a great set of weapons that it looks like an A tier weapon, right?
Yeah, I think definitely Centauri Saber belongs there. It's good almost every stage of the game. I'd say late game it falls off a touch as you start to lose the go again threats in your deck that kind of support the weapon.
Yeah.
But Centauri Saber otherwise very, very strong in both those Kasai and Bolton builds.
Yeah, and what I've seen in Bolton lately with the top, kind of 8 finishes and with the wins, more people are playing the Saber Bolton archetype than they are the Raiden Bolton when they get to those top 8s and wins, as far as that goes. So in that respect, it kind of works its way above Raiden, and to me that makes a perfect example for it being in that A tier. So I'm gonna, in post, I'll put it in as an A tier. It'll be great.
There you go. YouTube magic.
Boom. You'll love to see it. Okay, so then we have Dawnblade. The other, well, I shouldn't say the other, because there are like 5 weapons that you can play. 28 weapons that you can play in Warrior, because Warrior's just really kind of a bad class, and it needs all the help it can get, right?
Yeah.
So how do you feel about Dawnblade? What do you think?
I think Dawnblade belongs up there with Centauri. I don't think it's up there with Anothos or Crucible personally. But it's tough. Dorinthia obviously is just, you pair it together with, you can't separate those two. But I think recently, as people have start to get better blocking Dorinthia, it is possible to mitigate the Dawnblade effect and that kind of polarizing presence. So sometimes, especially if you can get her with a 1 or 2 card hand, it's not as strong. Sometimes mid game or such. Late game, very, very strong Dawnblade though. But yeah, I think it belongs to the Centauri.
I would also put it in the A tier, and it just makes a ton of sense to be in A tier because for Dorinthia exactly, it's S tier, right? More often than not, they're playing Dawnblade with Dorinthia, but for any other warrior, it's horrible. Like, it doesn't play.
Yeah.
And I think that's by design, and I think that's really cool and thematic. But because of that, in my opinion, it's A tier. Because if you're looking at all warriors that can access this weapon, one warrior is fantastic with it. It's like the weapon that you pick, it would be S tier. The other ones, not even close, right? So, like, you could play Dawnblade in other warriors if you wanted to, but it's not nearly as good as what their other options are. And so I think it could settle nicely in that A tier, along with the Centauri Sabers, right?
Yeah, the Warriors have a very solid, like consistent weapons. That's definitely what they're based around. And warrior by warrior, you can push it up to S tier depending how you build it.
Yep.
I agree.
Okay, so on to Death Dealer, and this one I am actually very curious on your opinion of. Death Dealer, the I don't want to call it the Azalea weapon because technically Azalea has access to 2. Death Dealer, the original Ranger weapon, we'll put it that way. Where does this fall for you? Are you high on Death Dealer and its card draw ability, or do you prefer the Redliner? What are you thinking for this?
Death Dealer is, in my view at least, super duper strong.
Okay.
I think the ability to set up the bottom of your deck with the pitch, which is what usually Ranger is looking to do, at least Azalea to some extent, and also get to the bottom of your deck really, really quickly because of the draw, is inherently very, very strong. It also makes 2-card hands into 3-card hands for the most part, which if Ranger eventually learns how to block, will be very, very relevant.
Oh man, that'd be so wonderful if Ranger learned how to block. So where would you put it then?
I'd keep it above Dawnblade on A tier for now. I hate hating on Azalea, but the issue with that dealer is more the hero currently than the weapon itself. But I was Azalea player for the longest time though, so
I don't even know if I agree with that. I don't think the problem with Azalea is necessarily Azalea. But maybe that's another video for another time too, because I could go on I could write you a manifesto about how I feel about Ranger, because I love the Ranger class. See, I was gonna hover and put this in B tier, and I'll tell you why. I think this card is totally interchangeable with Redliner, and I think because of that, both of them make sense in B tier. But I totally get where you're coming from. If we're looking at a classic constructed perspective too, I think the card draw makes so much more sense here in A tier. And as far, I don't know about you, but as far as like which one of these is like where, I don't know if that really, I don't know if I could split hairs that far. I'll put it this way though, because you make a good argument.
Fair enough, indeed. Yeah, definitely. Very, very strong weapon for sure. But yeah, it's Ranger's just such an interesting and complex class. That it's still going to take some time to figure out. Maybe with 2 arsenals though.
There you go. That's the
change.
answer. See, if you just have 2 arsenals, we could get down to business. But I guess we'll find out about that soon enough. I'm hoping that someone spoils that very quickly, because I want to know how that's going to function.
Yeah.
On to Dread Scythe. Dread Scythe, the Rune Blade weapon. Shadow Rune Blade, right? Yeah, Shadow Rune Blade weapon. And okay, look. This was spoiled by Bill at Reaper Games. And Reaper Games is local to me, and Bill is a friend of mine. But I'm sorry, Bill, this card can't be anything higher than D tier. I'm sorry, Bill. It's not your fault. It's Dread Scythe's fault. This card just can't do it, man. It's like cool in limited. Like it'd be really cool in limited, but if you try to build around it, you're just like, why am I playing this weapon? It serves me no purpose. Like hard control would be kind of cool if you could make it work, but it just doesn't, and it makes me sad because it looks really nice. It looks really cool.
Yes, it's a great themed weapon. It feels like it should be better than it is, but right now the way things stand, like. You can play Grasp and then attack with the Reaping Blade for the exact same thing. Almost the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Arguably Reaping Blade having the stronger effect as well.
Yeah.
So,
because it's persistent.
Yeah.
Because it's
Exactly,
persistent. That's why it's so much better, yeah. It's a little sad, but it goes there for now, and maybe down the line somehow it'll get support. I don't know, a supplemental set, man. They supplemental set number 2 for all of the new talent classes would be a really fun way to support the old Dread Scythe, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally agree.
On to the Edge of Autumn. Edge of Autumn. This is This is an interesting one because, like, you look at this on paper and you're like, wow, it's like almost a strictly better Kodachi, but you can only run one, and that is huge. You can only run one. How do you feel about Edge of Autumn? Because I'm like ready to slap it right here.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there. The ninjas need their 2 hand slots. If it even was just one, you could run like a Zephyr Needle or a Kodachi with it. That, in which case, probably run both Kodachis. But even if you could run a Zephyr Needle with it, it would be a little different. But taking up 2 hand slots for ninja really limits them, stops them from going up the chain link. Yeah. When you put it in the scope of that class and what that class is trying to do, it's super, super difficult to justify the Edge of Autumn.
Yeah.
To the bane of all Iron players, but Iron lovers.
It'd be kind of cool because I think the art on that card is beautiful as well. It'd be kind of cool if it was a little bit more punchy, if it had a little bit more going on for it. But unfortunately, because it doesn't, and because it takes up both hand slots, and it doesn't allow you any flexibility whatsoever to kind of mix and match for the matchup, it just ends up really falling off. It's fantastic if you're playing Welcome Deck versus Welcome Deck, though.
Yes.
Because that's the only thing in the format. So it's the only weapon that you can play. So there you go. It's fantastic. For that exact reason.
Definitely the best to introduce people to the game too, for sure. That's it's great.
Okay, now we get Galaxy Black, or some people say Galaxy Black. How do you pronounce it?
I'm a Galaxy guy.
Galaxy guy,
but
okay.
Not too stingy.
Galaxy Black. What do you think? Galaxy Black. I love the way this weapon looks, and I wish it were better than it is. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's Galaxy Black. I find probably slap it down into right in the middle B tier.
Yeah.
It falls in the build around. Really good in limited though.
Oh yeah, it's the one you run in limited, right? I did hear some people at pre-releases running Dread Scythe and doing pretty well with it, just because they could like threaten that. Like the idea of gaining life can't happen, but I mean, it just makes so much sense to play Galaxy Black. You just attack with it. It's free. It threatens like arcane damage. I think for me, I would teeter between these 2 slots. Like you could argue that this is a C tier just because the other 2 weapons are so much better that you immediately gravitate towards it. For me, I think I would put it in C tier. But you can argue. I could see you arguing B tier. Which do you want?
I think C is fair. Like now I'm thinking there's some better weapons here that are definitely going to find their way there.
Right. Like you could side in the other 2, and you'd probably do that more often than you'd play Galaxy Black. But you're always playing it over Dread Scythe.
Yes. Yeah, I think it does. It wants to do what Nebula Blade does. It's like the relationship Dread Scythe has with Reaping Blade, Galaxy Black has with Nebula Blade.
That's a really good point. Oh my gosh, that's a really good point. It wants to do exactly what Nebula Blade does, but attacking for 4 and attacking for 3 are so wildly different in this game because of that breakpoint that I think it easily falls to C, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Pushing on, like alphabetically, what's next? Isn't it Hexagon? It'd be Harmonized Kodachi, wouldn't it? Or Hatchet.
Hatchet.
Hatchet? H-A-T. Oh, no, it is Harmonized Kodachi. Haha.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You got me.
Fixed it. No, it's okay. It's no big deal. Harmonized Kodachi is the nuts. It's the uber nuts, right? I mean, we slap this thing down. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we put it here. But this just seems like an S tier kind of a weapon, right?
So powerful. It's but as I said, like as I was alluding to earlier, it's one of those weapons your opponent has to play around, and just makes life so difficult. Especially as you're learning originally to block ninja. The Kodachis are very, very difficult to deal with. Losing a card almost every turn to stop mass triggers is very, very devastating. And it's solid every turn of the game. It is a great turn 1 weapon. It is a great turn 15 weapon. There's never a point where you're like, man, I wish I had Edge of Autumn. So
exactly. And it's crazy too, because like it's one of the first things that you learn when you play the game, at least it was for me, because there were only 4 heroes when I picked up the game when it dropped, is like you never go to 2 or 1 if you can avoid it against a ninja, right? Particularly, you never go to 1 against a ninja because your hand is just going to die. If you go to 1 against a ninja, they Kodachi and they win the game, right? And because of that, it highlights your point that you made. This is a card you have to play around if you're playing against a ninja, because if you don't know that you shouldn't go to 1, you'll very soon learn that you shouldn't go to 1 against a ninja because of what Kodachi can do. So powerful stuff, man.
Super strong. Lots of interactions, even in with Razor being so threatening late game off that Kodachi too.
Yeah.
It becomes impossible to play around. Even sometimes if they have 3 Razors left in their deck, you can barely play around it, even with 4 life or 5 life left. So very tough.
It's true. Totally S tier in my mind. What isn't S tier are the hatchets. Where are the hatchets? Because I'm thinking that they are very kind of middle of the road.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Be either B or C for me. With hatchets.
Let's think.
They have the big Bolton turns. Yeah.
Would you justify B tier for the hatchets, or do they really just kind of fall to C tier? Because like if you had your druthers, and you could pick Centauri Sabers, hatchets, Raiden, Dawnblade, would you ever pick up the hatchets? You know what? I figured it out. You might if you wanted to play Spill Blood.
Yes. Yeah.
B tier.
Definitely.
There it is.
B tier gives it. I think Hatchet Thurinthia has a little more to give to sometimes than giving credit for. So I think Shiki can push it up to B tier and be pretty safe.
I'm comfortable with that as well, because Spill Blood is a really cool card and people should play it. So let's put it at B tier, because I think that is exactly where it belongs. Hexagore. What do you think about Hexagore? That one is a spicy card. This one, I think you could really talk about for a long time.
Yes. Hexagore is super spicy. When you talk about cards that possibly don't have the support yet, but might be given it one day, Hexagore definitely comes to mind. It also comes to mind in terms of the theoretical power level, that when you start to discuss decks, the fact that you could just load up on the blood debt, make sure you're safe, and then start just being much more efficient with your action points and damage output is very threatening. But again, super hard to pull off. Very bad early game.
Yeah.
So
I think this
requires build around.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think this is definitely like that. For me, this is like a C tier kind of build around card. Like, I feel like you have to completely rethink how you play Levia, and how you build Levia in order to make Hexagore work. And so if you look at a Hexagore list, you may see cards in there that you're like, I don't normally see that. And it's because they want Hexagore to be more consistent. And so therefore, I think it earns that build around kind of tag. I wish we could put that in a separate thing, build around somewhere, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I think once first of all, Levia is such a high lord class, so not enough people looking into it and really working through Hexagore. And those who are even working in Levia are usually working claws and stuff. So once he gets to that once the Shadow Brute player base, I think, matures, establishes a solid base with a claw or club build or whatever, and then I think you're going to find players who eventually move to Hexagore and try to tweak an already established build. Very hard to go from nothing to Hexagore build, though.
I agree with that. I think it's one of those thinky kind of cards, which is interesting because you read the effect on paper and you're like, okay, I understand kind of how this works, but I think Brute, and specifically Levia, but mainly Brute, really I guess all of Brute, is just so thinky. It's just so... You have to be so meticulous with how Brute works that I don't think there's a ton of people that are literally trying to make that card work. And so maybe it's better than it is. I don't know.
Definitely, the designers made it for a reason, right? So it's a Majestic probably for a reason as well. So it probably has some power.
Then again,
for sure.
Sorry, Bills. I feel so bad. Okay, Iris of Reality. This one is another very interesting one because I feel like I can't talk about Iris until I talk about Luminaris, but I'm going to do it anyway. Iris of Reality is one of those cards that is honestly really good in a vacuum. The effect here is really good in a vacuum. But there's something that's just better against most things. And because of that, it doesn't get the just desserts, I guess, are the best way to put it. So to me, this is like right now, currently, realistically, a B tier weapon. I would side this in matchups. Like I would really consider putting this in sideboard in Classic Constructed for like Bravo, for Rhinar, for anything that has a proliferation of 6 attacks. I would slap this in the sideboard and just swap to that, along with the swaps that you make into auras, swapping out of more heralds or swapping out of more aggressive things, and play auras and play more blues and play iris, because honestly the card is really good. It feels power level wise like an A tier card, but because of the next card we're going to talk about, it's a B tier.
Yeah, I agree. Iris is super useful against those classes that can pop Phantasm. And when I look at Iris too, I think it's a lot of the cards introduced for Prism are very tailored to that whole light illusionist kind of thing, where you're focusing on the yellow pitch. But Iris doesn't have the light illusionist restriction. Any illusionist coming later can use that powerful effect, and it gives you automatic breakpoints on those auras, so can
which
be very,
is
very
super
dangerous.
punishing in limited. That oh my god, it's so punishing in limited. You can play Iris of Reality, Prism, and then just try to focus on getting a Herald to hit or creating a Spectral Shield, and then just Spectral Shield them and then play something big. Spectral Shield them, play something big. It's so good. I wish it were better, and I think exactly what you said. If they introduce another illusionist into the game, then they can just tap into that Iris immediately, and they could be off to the races, because that card, just play a bunch of blues and try to make a Spectral Shield. It'd be so much better if they had more Spectral Shield creation abilities.
Yeah, and even once you start getting more general auras out, maybe some cheaper auras that don't cost 4, then Iris starts to become super dangerous.
But unfortunately, it's overshadowed by the absolutely crazy power level Luminaris. Luminaris is like, I don't know, maybe if we did think about this, where would Luminaris fall?
Definitely with Kadachi. I'd say above. I'd say right next to Anathos, personally.
I think I would. Oh no, I think this can go right there. If this is probably like a good order. Like we're 99% of the time we're playing this. 100% of the time we're playing this. 100% of the time we're playing this. Maybe you go like this. I don't know. And then sometimes you sub out 1 if you're playing Blitz, which we'll talk about at the end, of course. But for me, Luminaris is the weapon. Period. End of story for Light Illusionist. Prism, you play Luminaris. The only time you would consider not is if everybody in the whole world is playing Rhinar all of a sudden. And then you're like, what happened to the world? How did this come about?
But yeah, Luminaris is when it's rolling, it is mind-blowingly strong. The things you can do with that card. And if Prism has those wonderful heralds rolling back to back, you really feel the power. And so you can't just do anything about it if you don't have the right hand and you're not Bravo or Brute.
Yeah. Giving go again to 7 attacks is broken. The fact that they put Phantasm on it is the only reason, and it's obviously a design choice. It's the only reason that Prism isn't Chain right now. Is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
I wish Chain had a direct counter like, oh, you try your go again? I pop your Phantasm and your turn is over. Like, that's exactly what Prism has, and yet Chain doesn't. But maybe they will. I don't know. Maybe that's what Frostbite tokens are meant to be. I really hope
that's
so.
Gonna be exciting.
God, I really hope so.
Just slowing it down a little bit would be nice.
We'll find out. All right, now we have to talk about the claws. How do we feel about these claws?
Oof. Well, the opposite of slowing it down. Claws are very, very strong in almost all brutes. So I think they definitely deserve some credit for that. The moment you have 2 action points with Brute, you're usually triggering that go again, or obviously with a certain special card.
You play Blood
named
Rush
Blood Rush
Bellows
Bellow.
and you're so happy, right?
Exactly. So I think Claws definitely can suit up into A tier there.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
100%
Super
agree.
big issues late game though.
That's true.
Very,
I mean,
very tough late game.
Yeah, I could see that. When you can't get the triggers to kind of line up, and land, then it becomes like one of those weapons that you're like, you know. But for me, this is definitely an A tier weapon because it can be run and likely should be run by every brute. Period. You know.
Yes.
So.
And there's a lot of support for it in the class too, especially the moment you have a second action point with either Scab Skin or Sand Sketch Plan or so forth.
Mm-hmm.
You have lots of great cards to support it with, such as Savage Feast, Savage Swing, and obviously coming after the chain, after those claw attacks, your opponent has to be constantly mindful of barraging beatdowns coming out of your hand.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very versatile card, and allows Brute to almost save Brute, I'd say, in the Crucible meta when it came out, where nobody was really paying attention to it, and the claws kind of helped elevate the status of Brute for sure.
I totally agree with that, and that's all the reason why it should be A tier. It is that playable. It's that good. Nebula Blade is an interesting thing because if we're talking pre-Monarch, this card is not where it's not anywhere on this top tier list. But now that we are post-Monarch, I feel like because Chain exists and because this is all Chain runs, it has to be S tier. It's funny because Viscera is like so different from Chain, but you probably still run this in Viscera. I don't know. Maybe you don't in certain cases because of Reaping Blade, but this has to be S tier, right?
Yeah, I think it's an automatic suit up there. In Chain, it's almost, there's just so much you can do with that card. It adds an interesting bluffing aspect too, where you play a non-attack such as like a Health Beyond or a Mavrian Skies or something, and then come in for the 4. So it becomes super difficult to block because you don't know what your opponent's going to come in with next, and they're definitely going to come in with something if they're playing either a nice little Bounding with Go Again or maybe a CNC buffed off the Howl.
Yeah.
So it's super, super lethal, and it's almost 2 for 5, which is which you're not going to be able to block the 4 against Chain most of the time. It's very, very difficult to block the 4 unless you're giving up equipment or a defense reaction.
Yep. And you have to either play defense reactions or give up a card and equipment to keep the rune chant from being created. So if they have the tempo and the advantage, which oftentimes they do because they play 2 cards of hands, or 2 hands of cards, I should say, they can play a non-attack action card and then attack you, even if it's just like that. If that's their turn, if they have like a 2-card hand, one's a non-attack action card, they pitch to attack with Nebula Blade. They're still putting on a tremendous amount of pressure in the long term, because if you let it hit, then they're coming in their next turn with an attack and a rune chant and possibly another rune chant if they play something or they try to stagger it. It just gets really gross really fast. And I do think when we're looking at this from a Viscera perspective, it was sometimes run, but once they dropped Reaping Blade, that was the thing that you went for, because the archetype was OTK, and so keeping that life gain turned off for your opponent was paramount, and so this wasn't as played. So hence why it's so crazy to watch this weapon go from like, oh, down here to all the way up there with 1 hero released, which, I don't know, maybe it gives us hope. Maybe there's hope. No, I don't know. We'll see.
Yes, to the top.
To the top. Well, this brings us to Plasma Barrel Shot, which Plasma Barrel Shot here's the problem with Plasma Barrel Shot. It's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
And it's spicy, but it's just not there. It's just not all there. And maybe it's just because the pistol is so much more flexible that even if you're playing like Boost Dash, that you can just run the pistol anyway and not worry about trying to meet this incredible requirement. But maybe it's good and we just haven't played enough with it. I'm kind of hovering here in C tier, but maybe realistically it's D tier just because the pistol's so much better. What do you think?
I think I'll give it a chance to C tier. it does have some receiving qualities for sure. The
Yeah.
When you don't have the pitch and you're able to load up and put some extra pressure on, it's really a finisher.
Yeah.
And if you're coming at it only for like 3 or 2, you're doing a disservice to it. It should be coming in for at least 4 or 5 on your turn.
Totally.
And yeah, but it's in the same kind of decks that are trying to finish off with plasma barrel shot. You have the maximum velocities, you have the overblast, and all that you should be hitting with instead. So it's kind of an option B, where it doesn't really want to be an option B. It wants to be an option A, kind of finish the chain. So it feels oddly clunky at times, but still good. Can help out.
That's a really good point. It does feel like an option B when it shouldn't be, right? Because like the ability screams like you should try to use this after boosting and you get value. But when you look at your action point usage, ending with this and not being able to give it go again versus ending with something that consistently attacks for large amounts, like the cards you mentioned, it's like, do you want to? I guess you use it on the off turns when you don't have those cards to follow up or to finish with, but I don't know. Yeah, it feels like that's a really fine argument for why it's just not quite there yet, you know?
Yeah, it needs some help for sure.
Okay, so we have Raiden, and this is the last of the warrior weapons. Well, technically no, but yes, it is the last of the warrior weapons. Where would you put Raiden? I feel like Raiden's still really solid and should like earn its way into the A tier. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Raiden gives Bolton so much more general damage output on turns where he would have like just the setup turns. The take flight turns become infinitely better. Makes you for sure think twice about the different cards like Lumina via the Vanguard and so forth.
Yeah.
Where you can just pump the Raiden and then come in for more after, because the hatchets and the sabers obviously cost pitch.
Yep.
But Raiden being free just gives you that extra pitch or two to maybe slap down a Valiant Thrust, slap down a Bolting Blade, and if you have to pay for it, and so forth.
It's interesting too because Raiden, when you look at it, or at least when I looked at it, I'll speak from personal experience. When I looked at it on paper, when it first was announced or shown off or spoiled, I was like, okay, fine. I get what it does. It does everything you want it to do. It, it starts at 0, and then if you charge, it attacks for 3, and then that buff means that you can, automatically give it go again off of the trigger, off of Bolton. And so you're like, cool, I get that. But it's not exactly like super flashy because it's only attacking for 3, right? But it's so that looking at it just that way is so surface level that when you actually stop and you look at what kind of craziness you can do with via the Vanguard into this for free, into a go again off of like the attack reaction trigger into something else, you start to really realize why this card is so good, because it's free. And because it's always, if you're attacking with it, it's always going to be, a go again trigger, because you're probably not going to attack for 0 with it not charging on that turn. And unless you want to be like super meme lord, if you did that in a tournament, I would clap for you. But oftentimes you're just straight up attacking for 3 and go again, and it's just pure calculated value,
Yeah, for sure. Attacking with a 0 cost weapon definitely feels good inside when you plump it down. But it's just, I think that late game for Raiden sometimes when you run out of threats, you're having trouble setting up, and your opponent's kind of messing with you a little bit with on-hit triggers or just sometimes pure damage, becomes super difficult to manage, and then you really miss having a weapon that has a consistent hit value.
This is true. Yeah, if you miss charges, it's worthless. And so that's why I would put this above Centauri Saber, which is invisibly floating over here. There you go. I would put Centauri Saber over these, is what I meant to say. Ravenous Meat Axe is S tier. Let's move on. We have Ravenous Meat Axe is what?
I'd say Meat Axe goes to B. I think there's a solid base there, but the RNG sometimes can really kick in with with Brute, many times your deck is usually very, very solid. 6 attacks, and once you've really fine-tuned it down,
Yeah.
you're going to be hitting for 5 most of the times. But man, it really, really stinks when you swing it and hit a Blood Rush Bellow, or sometimes you can't just do anything when you really need to arsenal a certain card.
Yeah.
And you have 2 cards in hand. You need to swing. You need to swing something, otherwise you'll give up a lot of tempo.
Yep.
And you can't take that risk of missing out on arsenaling a defense reaction or a blood rush or something like that.
Yeah, you just talked me into putting it. I want to put it down here now, just because it is so horribly bad when you miss. And I have missed multiple times with Ravenous Meat Axe, and now I don't like it. So I want to put it down here, but I could see the argument as well. I don't know. What do you think? We'll leave it be.
I think yeah. Let it be. Yeah.
We'll leave it be, just because I shouldn't let my own personal biases realize that the card can be good at times, even though I'm always going to miss with it. It's always going to attack for 3, and I'm going to discard like Barraging Beatdown or some dumb card like that. Curses.
Yeah, when it hits, it's super, super, super good. But when it misses, it's tough. And I'm not sure how much Brute wants to get through their deck quickly. Maybe to some extent, but usually Brute's happy with blocking up and using those cards as more of a defensive piece or setup pieces.
Yeah.
Running through their deck randomly is not sometimes what Brute's looking to do.
I agree with that.
So.
All right, Reaping Blade is interesting because Reaping Blade before Monarch was very much the go-to thing. It was like the go-to weapon. Honestly, Reaping Blade was the go-to weapon both in Blitz and in Classic Constructed for the most part, because I was looking at and talking with a bunch of I shouldn't say a bunch. I talked with a few Viserai players pre-Monarch, and they were talking about their pre-Monarch experience, and this was like it was the weapon. You would play this because again, you needed that ability to turn off people gaining life on you. But now it's kind of the weapon for Viserai, but this can also be played in Viserai. This could be played in Chain, but this is way better in Chain. So like, this is a weird card. I like it in A because it still has huge merit. But people could probably talk me into putting it at B. I still think this is worth citing in a variety of, I guess, formats. I don't know, maybe it's B. What do you think?
Reaping, well, obviously you have one. The OTK Viserai is obviously Life and Blood Blade, so definitely that one attachment is there. It's also really a fairly solid card mid game. As much although Viserai hates ending the chain with his weapon attack because he doesn't get that awesome rune chant that he likes. But in terms of mid game to late game, that plus Grasp is pretty solid 1-2 combo, especially because you're probably hitting all the blues now that you pitched earlier. The Reaping Blade becomes pretty decent. Outside of that Blitz OTK deck, it doesn't really have like a very solid home. Like, it's not bad in Classic Viserai, but it's not like fantastic either. So I keep it in the B.
Oh, you think
personally.
so? I was gonna lean A just because I feel like not only are you playing it in OTK Viserai and Blitz, but I would honestly probably play it OTK Viserai Classic Constructed, because maybe I'm making an argument to throw out Nebula Blade and attack with it on off turns, but you're still seeing people play life gain cards. You're still seeing people play Tome of Fyendal in Classic Constructed. And if you're playing like Sonata Big Viserai in Classic Constructed, then you want to still be able to kind of limit their life total. So I guess in this one, we can probably put it in either place. If you're playing anything that's not Viserai, then this is like, you would consider it and then maybe not just ever run it because you don't need to because Chain's so good. But if you're playing Viserai, this becomes more like that. So really could go any which way.
I think you convinced me there actually a little bit. I think you can push her up to A.
We're doing
it's a
it.
solid
We're
piece.
doing it.
We're doing it.
Doing it live. And that brings us to Red Liner. This was the spoiler for Kel. I think Kel spoiled Red Liner, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
He
which
did.
is so
He
cool.
loves. He loves his redliner.
So thematic, so nice. Where do you think this one is? I like Redliner. In fact, oftentimes I like it better than Death Dealer, but that's mainly because I play Azalea and Blitz.
I think redliner's a solid. I'm a B tier person for redliner. I think it's very, very solid in Blitz, and it's a build around card. Is exactly what redliner is.
Yeah.
You're looking to make a red line
Yeah,
as
I
much
mean,
as
that's
possible.
exactly what it is. Yep.
And just be aggressive, and sometimes on the off turns, at least you can keep something in arsenal and set up for another big red line turn. But in Classic Constructed, I don't think it holds up as well compared to Death Dealer, where you're going to be blocking more often. You want the 2-card hands to turn into 3, which the Death Dealer can do.
Yeah, I'd probably argue that. I would agree with you on that one. I think this fits nicely in a B tier, particularly if you're looking at it from a Classic Constructed perspective. Because Classic Constructed, you have more time and you probably have more colors in your deck.
Yeah.
Unless you've somehow just done, which people have done. People have played Azalea, just redline Azalea and just go ham, don't block, that sort of thing. But I mean, with the ability to pitch yellows and pitch blues and things like that, and have a longer game, I feel like Death Dealer makes more sense in Classic Constructed than Redliner.
Yeah. Redliner, again, is very, very fast. Death Dealer is all about that value over time. So they each have their formats.
Sledge of Anvilheim. Sledge of Anvilheim. It's a sad
Knock those out.
Right there.
Sledge.
It's better.
Yes,
Is it better? No.
One day it will be.
I do like
crossed.
it. I do like it. It looks like the art is so good. It looks like it should be better because it's so shiny and wow. But for me, it's down here. I've heard some people run it just to run it. Like, hey, it's just a significant, like, if I can pitch 4, I attack for 6 all the time. But I feel like that's exactly what a Nothos does, just with a little tiny bit more of a hoop to jump through. And because of that, I feel like I'm never really gonna just grab this. What do you think?
Yeah, it's so hard to justify right now to play the Sledge. It's even on the turns where you need, like, it requires 2 cards, which many times Guardian can play out a 3 cost, or if you have a Surge, a seismic attack. And if you're usually blocking, if you're playing Control, then you're probably blocking with 3 and swinging the hammer for 4 with the 1, which you can't do with the Sledge.
I think it falls D tier. Yeah. Which is sad.
I really want it to be good. Yeah.
Exactly.
But not today.
Speaking of a card I really want to be good, Talishar.
Yes.
Talishar the Lost Prince. Just, I like this card. Okay. Look, if I could pick one card that I would want to put into, like, just a tier by itself because I like it, it would be Talishar the Lost Prince. This card oozes flavor, and it's like the first. It is the first generic weapon that anyone can play, and yet no one plays it. So it's like, oh, where does it go? For me, I think it's a C tier card because it has to be played by exactly 2 heroes, but could be played by anyone, except no one really does.
That would be something. But yeah, I agree. The card has so much. You get this kind of like once upon a time great weapon, hits for 4, but it's just kind of rusting away, you know. But definitely, I've seen some Capdanes and some generic shapeshifters and so forth use it effectively. You have to be really careful when you use it. Trying to win with Talishar. Obviously, you have a deck that can live on its own without the weapon swings. But at times, you know, if you can get it to strike multiple times in a turn, which it can, you can sometimes get past the 3 rust counters and, you know, make use of that 4 attack for sure.
It's really interesting too because it can be played by everyone. And I remember Ian, Radio Reflex Ian, talked about there was a time where he actually played Talishar in Brute so that he could end his combat chain with a buffed up Talishar. And it was like, what? What are you doing? But the fact that you can do that, is so cool that it just has me excited. I really hope that they push generic weapons, because I would love for more generic weapons to be in the game. I think that's such a cool idea, and it's a natural fit for the game. So I'm hoping they make more.
Yeah, definitely. With lots of lore too. I like the generic weapons being generally full of flavor and accessible to everyone. So that's nice.
Totally agree. So it's dripping with it's an enigma. I just want to know about it. I just want to know why it's called Talishar, the Lost Prince. It's a sword, but it's come on. I want to know more about that. So they should make lore about it. All right, we're down to two. We're down to these two. We have Teklo Plasma Pistol, and it's the uber nuts. I mean, it's the reason that dash is a thing, so it has to go up here. Honestly, I would sit here and teeter between these two, or I guess these three, because it puts dash on the map and it allows dash to kind of continue to live. Is it better than Chain's weapon? I think so, because Chain can survive and do crazy things without a 4-attack weapon that threatens a rune chant. But I don't know if Dash can. I don't know if Bravo... Well, Bravo probably could. Maybe this is the most essential weapon for a class in the entire game. What do you think?
It's super, super polarizing. That weapon is why Dash dominated an entire Crucible. And absolutely just ran the entire constructed. It has so much support for such a young class with really only 2 sets of support. The plasma purifiers, and induction chambers just make that thing into a beast, where you feel you're not going to deck out the dash. You're not going to beat him in a value game over the long run. Once they have everything out, it's almost game set match most of the time.
Yeah, it is incredibly powerful. It is class defining, and it is the reason that you don't play the plasma barrel shot, because this card is so easy to use and just so good. It's just so good.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to play this card. And not only that, it creates the entire archetype, and a very powerful archetype of Control Dash, which beats Control Katsu just straight up. So it's this is the best weapon for its class.
Even once you don't have everything out, when you're starting the game with Dash with an induction chamber on the board, you can still play defensively and hit for 2 and 2. That's really solid value. You're beating out the Kodachis in a sense. So it's super, super good.
And that leads us to the last weapon on our list. Before we talk about Zephyr Needle, I just want to look how even this is. That's pretty solid. I'm not gonna lie.
Fearless Masters.
I expected more middle of the road cards, but I guess when we think about it, when we really talk about it, these cards are so defining that it makes sense. Zephyr Needle, though, where do you put this?
To break up the the beautiful scheme here, Zephyr Needle's interesting. I'd say obviously Ira runs it well sometimes, or Wizard players and such, but I don't think I can justify putting it all the way up into A tier for sure. It's
I let go on accident. I let go on accident. I'm sorry, everyone.
It found its way. I think I put it in the C.
Here's my thought.
Build around a lot.
That's a good point. I was thinking B tier just because it was so easily just reach for it and put it in your sideboard and then slam it against certain matchups.
That's true.
So for me, this was and this is only in Blitz too. So if you're saying we should factor in Blitz and Classic Constructed, then maybe it worked its way back down to C, because I don't think you've ever seen anyone play it in Classic Constructed, because there's just too much of a proliferation of defense reactions being played in that format. But because of how good it is, and maybe good is the wrong word, of how played it is in Blitz, I was actually going to teeter it right here on the B tier. Just barely B, because you almost always have it in your sideboard if you're playing Ira. Heck, you could argue that you almost always have it in your sideboard if you're playing Katsu in Blitz. And because of that, I'd put it in B, just barely. But I get what you're coming from. You're about to say C, right?
Yeah, I was about to say it's in that middle of B and C as well. I think I agree. It has strong place. outside of construct as well. It can play well limited, and those draft and sealed formats for sure. If you're playing a Benji, if you're playing even an Ira, it's really strong in those limited formats where people don't have the access sometimes to block it up, and it can deal a lot of damage to a lot more damage than the Kodachis can if you can support it. So definitely fair and B.
Which, by the way, is a good point to mention. You can actually do a limited format with Crucible of War. It's like a team draft or a team sealed, and you crack open X number of packs of Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, and Crucible, and with a team of people, and you all build decks, and you go out and you play games based on the decks that you build from all of those things. It's a really interesting format that's only been done a few times, I think. Officially, only been done a few times. But if you were curious if that's possible, yes, it is. You can actually play limited Zephyr Needle stuff.
Oh yeah, I did a format very similar to that with my local play group here, and it's very, very fun to play with all the weapons. And Zephyr Needle is definitely a star in that format. I know.
Yeah, it makes sense then for it to fall in this B. Because I wasn't factoring in limited, but you can actually do that. You mentioning it made me think about the fact that you could technically play this in limited, and that would be disgusting because Warrior all of a sudden doesn't have as much, ready to grab like Steel Blade shunts and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Much more safer.
Yes. So we did it. We did all of the weapons. These are all of the weapons ranked by tiers. And you know what? I would also say it's probably fairly good on the left to right scenario. Well, man, I appreciate you hanging out with me and going through these weapons and giving us the insight from your perspective.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for having me on. And it was great to talk about each one and kind of break it down.
If we enjoy this, if you guys like this video, you know what we should do? We should maybe consider doing like an equipment one or legendaries. That would be kind of fun. A legendary one would be a pretty spicy conversation. So
legendary would be spicy. Yeah.
It would, yeah, that'd be really good. If you would like to see that, leave a comment down below, and maybe we can get together and we can hack out some more videos, tier list wise, and we can go from there. But as always, everybody, thanks for watching.